the Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting has taken place, of course, in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English or French. For those in the room, of course, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. Now, to avoid audio feedback, before we begin, I would like to remind all members and other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures to prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback. Incidents that can cause injuries. All in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in colour, whereas the former earpieces were grey. Please only use a black-approved earpiece. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Thank you all for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on June 16, 2022, the Committee is resuming its study of the population sustainability of Yukon salmon stocks. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. From the Watershed Watch Society, we have Aaron Hill. And from the Skeena Wild Conservation Trust, we have Greg Knox. And another witness didn't sign in yet to join us, so Mr. Taylor. So if he joins, we'll announce his presence. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. But you will each have 5 minutes or less for your opening statement. Mr. Hill, you have the floor for 5 minutes or less, please.
Okay, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm the Executive Director at Watershed Watch Salmon Society. We're a charity that's been advocating for the conservation of BC's wild salmon for over 25 years. I've been with the Society since 2008, and much of my work here is focused on improving the sustainability of Pacific salmon fisheries. I've sat on many multi-stakeholder fishery management committees. I have a master's degree in biology, and I spent several years working as a fisheries observer with experience in all modes of commercial and recreational salmon fishing. I also grew up in Northwest BC, where my father worked as a fishing guide, so I have an intimate understanding of how important salmon are for maintaining livelihoods in our communities. Now, wild Pacific salmon and steelhead populations in BC have progressively declined over the past several decades, and in many cases, overfishing has been a factor both inside and outside our borders. After the young salmon and steelhead hatch in our rivers, they migrate out to the Pacific Ocean, where they feed and grow for at least 1 year. Many of these fish follow a clockwise arc around the Gulf of Alaska before they head south along the Alaska Panhandle, where they are then intercepted in large numbers by Alaskan commercial fisheries. Excuse me. Now, there's still some overfishing happening in BC, but many of our fisheries have been severely curtailed to help conserve our stocks in recent years. Our average annual harvest from 1924 to 1994 was 24 million fish, and the average in recent years is around 2.5 million. And that order of magnitude decline was a major impetus for the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative, which is providing a surge of $647 million of federal funding over 5 years to address these declines. But just as we've shut down our fisheries and spent all this public money on recovery, Alaskan fleets just across the border have not scaled back. We partnered with Skeena Wild Conservation Trust a couple of years ago to commission a comprehensive technical report on the impacts of Alaskan fisheries on BC salmon. The report confirmed that the Alaskan share of the catch has grown substantially in the past decade, and that Alaska is now the biggest killer of many BC salmon populations. In recent years, Alaskans have taken half the entire returning adult run in some salmon and steelhead populations from northern BC rivers, like the Skeena and the Nass. Last year, 2 Alaskan fishing districts along the BC border harvested more salmon than all fisheries in BC, Washington, Oregon, and California combined. They're also taking 30 to 75% of the catch of salmon populations from as far south as Vancouver Island and from throughout the Fraser watershed. Over 90% of Chinook salmon caught in the Southeast Alaska troll fishery originate in rivers in BC, Washington, or Oregon. A U.S. federal court recently ruled that that fishery in particular is preventing the recovery of endangered southern resident killer whales that rely on the Chinook salmon as their primary food source. Those whales move between Canada and the U.S., and we've scaled back our Chinook fisheries to help them recover. So we'd like to see Alaska move their fleet out of the areas on the outer coast where most of the BC-bound salmon are migrating. We'd like to see them implement basic management measures that are standard practice in BC and other jurisdictions. And those include collecting and sharing genetic information on their catch to determine the rivers of origin, requiring the live release of non-target species, reporting their discard numbers, and using cameras or observers on vessels to verify their catch numbers. These are all things that we do in BC, and they're not doing in Alaska. The Pacific Salmon Treaty is supposed to address these matters, but it's not, and we need the Alaskans to work with Canada to fix those shortcomings. We need Canada to put more pressure on the Alaskans, both inside and outside the treaty process. Canada could also offer up compensation to shut down these fisheries, similar to how the U.S. compensated Canada for shutting down the West Coast Vancouver Island troll fishery in 2008 to reduce impacts on fish that are migrating back to rivers in Washington and Oregon. And I know you were primarily interested in, the study was initiated around Yukon stocks, but these transboundary management issues are very severe for British Columbia as well. So that's why I'm focusing on that today. And these are solvable problems, and the solutions could put millions more fish back into BC rivers annually. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have.
Thank you for that. We'll now suspend for a quick moment. Our third witness has signed on, so we'll do a quick sound check. So, suspend.
Great. Thank you, everyone. My name is Greg Knox. I'm the Executive Director of Skeena Wild Conservation Trust, and I've been in that position since 2007. Our focus is on salmon conservation in northern British Columbia, and I have a background in science and environmental management. I'm also a certified fisheries technician, and I've been on the northern panel of the Pacific Salmon Commission for 14 years, so I have quite a bit of experience there. And I'm here because BC salmon are in crisis, as Aaron outlined. Alaska is now the biggest impact on many of our salmon populations. and we can't rebuild our salmon without their help. So I'll start with some information around some of the impacts. And in Alaska, the information is hard to get, and Watershed Watch and Skeena Wild commissioned an independent report to bring together all the best information from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and Department of Fisheries and Oceans a few years ago, and that's the basis of some of this information I'm going to provide. So just zooming back out a bit to just add to Aaron's, Alaska is harvesting, in Southeast Alaska, they're harvesting between 50 and 70 million salmon a year, just north of the British Columbia border. And most of these salmon are harvested in unselective seine fisheries. So some of the impacts I'll talk about now, which I'll start with sockeye salmon. And so Southeast Alaska catches about 1 million sockeye per year. About 80% of Alaskan sockeye catch from BC rivers. Up to about 30% of the Skeena sockeye run is taken in Southeast Alaska each year. And there's growing conservation concerns for Skeena sockeye, for example. They've declined, the wild populations have declined by about 90% from their historical abundance. And often we've shut down fisheries here in northern British Columbia to protect these fish, and yet Alaska has fished status quo, and there's no mechanisms under the Pacific Salmon Treaty to stop that. So the impacts are even higher for some individual populations. A good example is late Babine wild sockeye. They were once the largest population in the Skeena at about 1 million fish, one of the largest populations of salmon in Canada. And they've declined by about 93%, and Alaska's taking between 20 and 50% of that population every year in their fisheries. For chum salmon, North and Central Coast chum have suffered significant declines. Central Coast chum have declined by about 90% since 1960, and other North Coast populations have had similar declines. And so Alaska catches 10 million or more chum salmon just north of the BC border every year, and we have no idea how many of those chum are bound for British Columbia rivers, but it could be significant. And they're not doing the basic testing to figure that out. For steelhead, Skeena steelhead have declined rapidly over the last 5 years. The sport fishery brings in tens of millions of dollars each year to the local economy, and Alaska kills between 10 and 50% of the Skeena steelhead run each year. For Chinook salmon, as Aaron mentioned, most of these are not from Alaska that are caught in Alaska, and we have severely depressed populations here in British Columbia, and concerns over coho salmon as well. They take about 25 to 35% of the coho return each year. So as I mentioned, I've been involved in the Pacific Salmon Treaty. It was the intention, the principles set out are to prevent overfishing and to provide each party to receive the benefits of the number of fish originating from their rivers. And the PST is no longer meeting the main principles set out in the treaty. It was never designed to deal with climate change impacts and the salmon crisis we face today. Recent attempts by Canada at the treaty table have failed to get Alaska to take action. And the Pacific Salmon Treaty in its current form is impeding our ability to stop declines and enable rebuilding. So basically, the bottom line is Canada has significantly scaled back fisheries and invested heavily in rebuilding salmon. Alaska is now the biggest impact on many populations, and it's impossible to rebuild these salmon populations without their help. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We'll suspend for a moment to do that sound test again. Taylor now for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much. I apologize for getting on late. One of the things I'll talk about is how this fishery developed over time, and my age is showing on the screen as well. And it's just took me a while to coordinate with the people at the House of Commons to get the technology right. So I do apologize for being late. As I said, and as my biography points out, I started working in the fishery in 1980 and continued working through my career, ending up as vice president of a major fishing company in British Columbia and responsible for buying all their salmon and other products from both British Columbia and Alaska. As such, I spent a good deal of my career in Alaska purchasing fish in the areas we're speaking of. I hired, many of you might have seen the TV show Dangerous Catch. I used to hire those tenders to go out there and catch fish, buy fish from the same boats that are operating in that area and pack that fish back to Prince Rupert where we unloaded it and processed it. And besides doing that, I spent a lot of time in an airplane out in those fisheries. So I've seen those fisheries in operation. I've seen the fish that's being delivered, and I've seen them go through our plant. So I understand that fishery intimately. And so what Aaron and Greg are telling you and giving you the data, I can back up is from personal experience. This fishery is not sustainable, and it certainly does not match what Canada put in place. Canada, back in the 1990s, under the leadership of both a conservative and a liberal, John Fraser, sadly just passed, and Minister Anderson reduced interception fisheries in British Columbia because they saw the decline in our populations on the north and central coast. So many of the fisheries that were in place when the fishery was signed were eliminated under their mandates. So Canada does not catch Alaskan fish anymore. In fact, it's massively reduced its own interception fisheries on its own populations. Meanwhile, Alaska has maintained their fisheries and refuses to take the same kind of steps. And it's, one of the things that we have to make clear is no one's asking Alaska not to catch their fish. We're just asking them not to operate in areas that are have high interception rates. Now, the area that most we talk about is on the outside of the Panhandle in District 104. That area has no it doesn't have any Alaskan pink or chum salmon runs or any other type of salmon runs out there. This is a pure interception fishery. The boats that operate out there are licensed or have permits to fish anywhere else in Southeast Alaska. This is a dramatic choice by Alaska to fish in that area. And if this was these were Alaskan populations, it would literally be unconstitutional for Alaska to maintain those fisheries. They are required to ensure that escapement targets are met for their stocks. They're choosing to ignore their own constitution, what's mandated in their own constitution, in the management and operation of their fisheries intercepting Canadian fish. And as Greg pointed out, at one time in 1985, when the treaty signed, when we're balancing harvest benefits, maybe it made sense, but it does not make sense in a time of climate change. We're seeing rapid declines in our own populations, and we have interception fisheries that Canada eliminated, continue in the U.S., and it's not sustainable. It has to be changed, and it has to be. And it's one of the more interesting things that happened this week was Brian Riddell, eminent scientist, once on the commissioner in the Pacific Salmon Treaty, has said in writing that the treaty is broken. The treaty will not lead us to any answers. We have to look at other alternatives, whether that be having other negotiations with Alaska, buying out those few boats. Remember, it's only a small number of boats that fish out in the fending area, getting them to move, or some other approach to encourage Alaska to do what's right. Remove those interception fisheries, change its fishery, match what Canada does in terms of building sustainable salmon fisheries so that we can protect our populations going forward.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to our rounds of questioning. Before I do, I want to welcome the Honourable Rob Moore here today and subbing in for Mr. Small, maybe. Yes. Thank you. Welcome to committee. And Mr. McLean, obviously subbing in for our buddy from New Brunswick. That's right. Okay. And Mr. Backrack is joining us as the NDP representative, but I understand Ms. Byrne is going to do the voting online. You're going to do any questions here in the room. Okay, just so as I got that right. So, okay, we'll go to our first round of questions. Mr. Arnold, for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. But I would like to go straight to questions to hear from you, but there's another issue that I have to interject here at this time. And the opening statements today draw more attention to this, that we really need to hear from the minister. Questions in addition to the many questions that we have previously and unanimously agreed to invite the minister to answer, but she has repeatedly declined 5 of the 6 invitations this year. Because the minister has repeatedly declined to appear to this committee, we have not been able to ask her questions that many of the Canadians on a number of topics to the minister's portfolio. As such, I move that the committee express its deep disappointment that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard has declined 5 requests to appear before the committee to answer questions on important matters related to her portfolio, and that this be reported back to the House. This notice was put on motion April 26, 2024. And before my honourable colleagues speak to the motion and possibly move amendments, I suggest that if the parliamentary secretary can commit to consult with the minister and provide to the committee by the end of the day, Monday, May the 6th, a firm date for the minister to appear at the committee for no fewer than 2 hours in May, I will accept debate on this motion be adjourned.
Mr. Chair, maybe my colleague Mr. Arnold didn't listen last committee, but I think the clerk received some confirmation by the Minister's office that she was coming to committee in a couple of days or weeks from now, right? Is that right? Can you just repeat that for the committee?
The Minister is available June 6th for 1 hour and September 26th for 1 hour.
Any more discussion on the motion? Mr. Kellaway.
I'd like to move an amendment. I move the following amendment to the motion by adding the following after the last sentence in the motion. Quote, that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government provide a comprehensive response to the committee's report.
Okay, so we've heard the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? Mr. Perkins.
Just perhaps a question and a comment. A question for the clerk, if I could. What's the day that the estimates are tabled in the House?
They have to be reported by May 31st.
Right. So that's the problem with the June 6th date, is that the number one rule in Parliament is, in terms of committee business, is estimates trump everything in terms of appearances, including government legislation. So the minister coming after estimates, to me, is a disservice to this committee's job of scrutinizing the estimates before they're reported to Parliament. It's kind of, the horse is out of the barn coming on June 6th to talk about estimates. It's too late now. We can't do anything. So I would suggest that's why we need to stick with MP Arnold's motion in order to ensure that the minister is here before estimates report. And she's had some notice of that for a while. We've been asking for her to come to estimates before they're reported back to the House. I see no reason why she can't.
Mr. Kellaway.
just on that point, we can certainly try to get it here for next week, but at this point, I can't make any promises on that, not seeing her schedule. Sorry, I said we could try to get her next week, but I don't have her schedule on me, so we can get back to that.
Mr. Arnold.
As I mentioned, if you can get back to us prior to the end of day on Monday, May 6th, that she will appear for 2 hours in May, then if you can commit to getting us back to us on that, then I'll table discussion.
I can certainly endeavor to do that.
Okay, all right. So now, the motion was amended by Mr. Callaway. Do we vote on the amendment and then the main motion? Okay. Vote. What? But it hasn't been, I don't think it's been voted on, was it?
If he's going to provide us a date, if he's going to
But
commit,
there's an amendment on the floor. If they agree to what Mr. Callaway has said and what Mr. Arnold is saying, I don't think we even got to vote if that's the case.
right, if,
Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Hardy.
Based on this, would it be just useful if we adjourn debate? Okay.
because we have a commitment from Mr. Callaway
That he's going to get back to us.
to get back to us before the end of day Monday, that he has requested the minister provide a date in May that she will appear for 2 hours. I'll accept adjournment of debate.
Okay, that is my mission, and I will follow up on that mission on Monday.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion and what's taken place?
I'll move to adjourn the debate.
Okay. What? Unanimous consent? Okay. The debate adjourned. Thank you, sir. And your time is up. Oh, I hate doing that. Mr. Hanley, for 6 minutes or less, please.
Okay, thank you very much to all the witnesses and for appearing. And you're right. I know one of you pointed out that this is a study on concentrating on Yukon River salmon, but given that there are definitely parallels, many of which you brought up in your testimony. So one question for. I think, it could be any of you, but maybe Mr. Knox, I'll start with you. I wonder about revisiting the Pacific Salmon Treaty. And any of you maybe jump in to answer this question, but is there a possibility through the Salmon Treaty, presumably this is a conversation that has happened or a proposal, like what would be the status of or the possibility of revisiting and revising the Pacific Salmon Treaty to address this issue, given that it's clearly not working at the moment?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There, on the Canadian side of things, there's a lot of recognition of a lot of the challenges, and I think even in Washington and Oregon, with both the panelists and commissioners, that there are lots of problems. Alaska is more resistant to any change. So the reason I say this is because there's currently a review of the Pacific Salmon Treaty being done by the Commission on Environmental Cooperation within the treaty. And it's assessing these sorts of things, although its mandate isn't clear whether its mandate will actually get at the heart of whether the treaty's actually meeting the principles set out in the treaty, i.e. making sure we're not overfishing each other's populations and that we're getting the benefits from our own populations. And so I think that review would need to be revised to really assess whether each chapter is meeting the objectives set out in the treaty. And then from there, recommend much stronger mechanisms to actually revise the treaty based on the current environmental challenges our salmon are facing and the efforts we're putting into rebuilding these populations.
Thank you. And how much of this would be specifically a negotiation or conversation with the state of Alaska versus the U.S. federal department, relevant U.S. federal departments?
Well, I think it would be helpful to have those conversations with the U.S. federal departments because they have influence on the commissioners. And ultimately, we're dealing with commissioners from Alaska, Washington, and Oregon all together, not just Alaska itself. So when we renegotiate the treaty, so the next renegotiation, it has to be renegotiated by 2028. Our Canadian commissioners are dealing with all of the U.S. commissioners in that renegotiation. Alaska is part of the U.S. Commission. So I would say that diplomatic work in the short term to work to get U.S. Folks on side, and then also at the same time initiating discussions maybe with U.S. Commissioners at the treaty table. I think both of those things need to happen to create the political will to actually do a thorough review of the treaty and to make the necessary revisions in a timely manner. And like I said, I think it just really has to be laser focused on whether we're meeting the principles set out in the treaty. Because they're pretty straightforward, and the current review is not asking those hard questions.
Thank you. So it sounds like that could be something that our Minister of Fisheries and Oceans could take on in terms of that sort of nation-to-nation conversation to really help renegotiate the terms.
Yes, exactly. It would be really helpful to have that leadership from the minister, and also I will state that Alaska is interested in the health of the transboundary rivers and watersheds that are adjoin BC. And so one of the conversations we're currently having is with the British Columbia government, the provincial government, to see if there can be conversations around how we ensure that the water flowing down into Alaska from our rivers is kept clean, while at the same time they're doing a better job to protect our salmon steelhead populations. And so I think this can happen not only at the federal level, but at the provincial level as well. And we've seen some movement by the province on that as well.
Okay. Do I have time for another question, Mr. Chair?
11 seconds.
Okay. I'll come back to you if I get another round. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci à nos témoins d'être présents. Je ne doute pas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. I have no doubt we have much to learn from them. But this does seem to be the day of updating motions.
Est-ce que ça vous va?
Is that all right? I'd like to remind the committee that I also have a motion, 108.4, to complement 108.4, which was my study on criteria used by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to set redfish fishing quotas.
Apologies to my colleague. The interpretation does not seem to be working on my end, and although my French is pretty good, I don't want to not understand what's being said. So I'm not sure if my other colleagues that are virtual are experiencing the same thing, but I'm not getting an English translation.
You want to say a sentence and see if we get translation?
Je peux compter quelques mots pour voir si ça.
Shall I continue? I could sing, but I don't know how thrilled the interpreters would be.
continue.
Ça fonctionne?
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Ça fonctionne?
Is it working? Right. I'll continue in the same vein. My motion, which I submitted a notice for on February 29th. At the time, I had asked the committee to reflect on the possibility of having Minister Stephen Guilbeault appear, as well as Ms. Sylvie Lapointe, who is president of the Atlantic Groundfish Council. And I would, of course, agree to having the minister come and appear before the committee. So I would also like to debate on the possibility of having them appear. So my motion, which would require both of these persons to appear.
Okay, have everybody got a copy of the motion as mentioned by Madame Debienne? I know it was, we'll resend it, I guess, but I know it was sent out some time ago.
Ça vous,
She's sending it now. Everybody let me know when they got it.
Je peux combler l'intermède par un petit bout de chanson.
We could, of course, conclude with a little verse from a song.
Okay, it's been sent. Everybody should be receiving that right now. I got it. Mr. Cormier.
Can we ask for like a 2 or 3 minute just break?
Recess? Yeah.
Okay.
Have you got
Recess?
the motion?
Yeah, yeah.
Everyone has received
Yeah.
it? Okay, we'll take a couple of minutes to talk about We've heard the details of the motion. Call the vote. Okay, is there anybody who wants to speak to the motion?
Alors, Monsieur le Président, est-ce que je peux...
I'm checking to see if any
May I?
debate the motion.
J'aimerais relire.
I would like to reread the motion, if I may, just to make sure we're all on the same page, as it were.
Yeah, you can read that again if you want, Madame Debienne.
She wants to read it, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
De la présente étude sur les barèmes utilisés par la ministre.
That as part of the present study on the criteria used by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to set redfish fishing quotas, the committee invite Ms. Sylvie Lapointe, President of the Atlantic Groundfish Council, to testify and answer questions from members of this committee for 1 hour. That as part of the study, the committee invite the Minister of the Environment, Mr. Stephen Guilbeault, for 1 hour to answer questions from members of this committee. That this meeting be held prior to the drafting of the report on this study.
Voilà.
That's it.
The details of the motion. Any discussion? Okay, call the vote.
Monsieur Cormier.
Oui.
Mr. Hanley.
Oui.
Mr. Hardy.
Yes.
Mr. Kellaway.
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey.
Oui.
Mr. Arnold. Mr. McLean.
Oui.
Mr. Perkins.
Oui.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Madame Desbiens.
And Ms. Barron.
Ms. Barron.
Yes.
Okay, unanimous. Done. So now, your 6 minutes are up, of course, but we'll go now to Ms. Barron. No, or
Yes, Ms. Barron.
Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say a big thank you to all the witnesses that are here and for all of your very important work. Apologies for some of the interruptions here, and I hope we're able to utilize the rest of our time hearing from you and gathering this important information. With that, I want to pass it over to my colleague, the MP for Skeena-Bulkley Valley, to be able to ask you questions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Ms. Barron, for the introduction and for sharing her committee with me. Obviously, this is an issue that affects folks in the region I represent in a big way. Skeena-Bulkley Valley comprises about 300,000 kilometers of northwest BC and includes all of the rivers that have been mentioned so far and many of the fish stocks that are impacted by the Alaskan interception issue. I raised this issue with and I want to thank our panelists, our witnesses, for joining us today and sharing this important perspective. I did bring this up about 2 years ago in Parliament with the former Fisheries Minister. And at the time, the minister essentially said that because it was a transboundary issue and involved the United States, that the government was passing it off to Global Affairs Canada to deal with on a diplomatic basis. And I'm wondering, to all three of our witnesses, have they ever seen hide or hair of Global Affairs Canada on this issue? Is there leadership being shown by Canada's diplomats in trying to resolve this important issue?
I have not heard or seen anything from Global Affairs Canada.
And I have not heard or seen anything from Global Affairs Canada. My understanding was it was back with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Taylor, you can indicate as well if you'd like.
I have not heard that Global Affairs Canada has been involved at all.
It was a disappointing response because it seemed like an attempt to sort of slough off a very vitally important issue onto a department that hasn't prioritized it since then. But I'll stay on the topic of leadership. Where does that leadership need to be shown? Which department is the logical lead for this? And how much leadership have you seen from the federal government on this issue?
I could take a stab at that. We haven't really seen much from the current minister. We know that the commissioners within the commission, several of which are DFO staff, have been stepping up on this issue. And since we started raising these concerns a couple of years ago, it has now shifted to be the sort of at the top of the agenda in the Pacific Salmon Commission. I think Mr. Knox can probably confirm that. The previous minister, Ms. Murray, had said that it was at the top of her agenda when she was meeting with the American Consul General, I believe, or the American Ambassador a year or two ago. But we haven't really seen much since then. So it would be great to hear the current minister speak out on this issue and further elaborate what the department is able to do beyond what they're already doing, because we really do need to kick it up a notch in terms of diplomacy, both within and outside the process.
Thanks for that.
And Mike,
go for it, Mr. Taylor.
Yes, my experience is that the department keeps on pushing back and pointing to the treaty as the place to have these discussions. And that is a problem, because the problem we're discussing here is with Alaska. Alaska has an effective veto over any decisions that might affect its fishery. And in terms of the context of the treaty is not only happens in affects northern BC, but of course our recreational fisheries are driven by what the outcome of the treaty, as is our Fraser River sockeye management. So you can't can't do too much within the context of the treaty to address specific North Coast issues. And that has been a challenge. So I think we have to look at solutions beyond that of trying to find an answer within the context of the treaty and overcoming Alaska's effective veto.
How much willingness has there been on the part of the Alaskans, whether that's the Alaskans on that are engaged in the Pacific Salmon Treaty, or Alaskan commercial fishers, Alaskan tribes? How much interest has there been in engaging in a really proactive way on this important issue?
Well, I can answer that from this perspective. When I first went up to buy fish in Alaska, I really got a lesson handed to me, and that was Alaskans are not Americans. They're Alaskans number one, Americans number two. And the Alaskan fishermen are no way want to look at giving up fisheries. However, and this is an important perspective, the fisheries that we're really concerned about occupy only a very small number of boats in relative terms. There's 274 boats licensed or have permits to fish in southern and southeast. Maybe 30 fish in the problems or areas that we consider a problem. So this is an issue where the American fishermen are standing up for American fishermen, but it really is not all American fishermen. So there's an opportunity there to have a discussion with the other 240 Southeast permit holders about what they might like to see.
Yeah, and I'll just add.
To close up, anyone who wanted to respond beside, we'd appreciate if you send it in writing, perhaps, to the committee. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
I'm going to go to Mr. Arnold.
Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins, and thank you. This testimony is somewhat shocking. It sounds, what I just heard is there's someone standing up for Alaskan fishermen, and that's Alaskans and so on. Who should be standing up for Canadian fishermen that continue to be impacted and shut down? I'll start with you, Mr. Taylor, if you could. I believe you're muted.
Who should be standing up? Well, who's got the mandate to stand up is our Minister of Fisheries. And I think she just needs some new ideas of how to address an intractable problem. And I think the ideas are out there, but they can't be the same old. And that's, I think, a lot of the advice she's been given is to work within the context of the treaty. And as I pointed out in my opening statements, one of the leading salmon scientists in Canada and an lead commissioner on the treaty is saying the treaty's broken. You can't look to the treaty to fix this problem.
I heard that in your earlier testimony. Would you like to elaborate a little bit further on how he, maybe relayed how the treaty is broken and what the problems are with the treaty? How can it be corrected? And obviously, we don't have time to wait for a renegotiation of the treaty to start rebuilding these stocks. Can you elaborate a little further?
Yes, maybe the most effective way is we'll send it to you, his statement to you, and you can read it. But he is, in essence, he's saying we're in a new world with climate change. Populations are crashing. And the treaty is not no longer is the framework for which to deal with the problem of Alaska continuing to intercept Canadian fish. He does not point to necessarily what the answer is. He just says that he just argues that we have to look at other alternatives to deal with this issue rather than just the treaty. Not to say the treaty is not part of a solution, but there has to be. We're not going to move past Alaska within the context of the treaty. We have to Canada has to stand up and look at other alternatives.
Okay, thank you. Possibly to Mr. Hill or Mr. Knox. Do you have any comments on the status of stock assessments and determining which stocks are being caught in non-selective fisheries, how that's impacting the stock assessments and season openings, and have those stock assessments actually been done?
Yeah, I can answer that. So if we're talking about Alaskan fisheries that are intercepting British Columbia stocks, they are collecting some information. They're doing DNA analysis on the sockeye that they're catching, but they don't provide us with population level information. They only provide like an aggregate of Skeena populations, for example. For Chinook salmon, they're collecting DNA, and it's pretty good. For chum salmon, which I mentioned are at extremely low levels, extreme conservation concern, they're collecting no information, and they could be doing DNA analysis. For coho populations, they could be collecting DNA, but they're not. For steelhead, they're collecting no DNA, and they're also not collecting any information on how many steelhead are being caught and released or dying. And pink salmon, they're not providing any information on how many BC pink salmon are being caught. So it's poor. And then on...
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's poor. Can you explain a little bit about how that data could be obtained? Is that through sampling of bycatch, and is that bycatch going to waste? I think we've only got about half a minute.
Yeah, they can collect it. They can do DNA analysis on it. It's common practice in most fisheries. And they even have money within the Northern Fund of the Pacific Salmon Treaty to do that analysis. So the money's there and they can do it. They already have sampling programs in place. It's just a matter of adding more sampling. So it's totally doable. It's done in lots of fisheries around the world, including in British Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. 3 seconds to spear. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
I'll take Mel's 3 seconds. There's a pattern developing here because we heard from one of the First Nations chiefs on Tuesday that there is abundance at the mouth of the Yukon River going into the Bering Sea, but very, very few fish are making it past the Canadian border. And it seems that we have, the same phenomena happening, in the waters leading to British Columbia. We also see what's been going on with mackerel on the East Coast. You can even throw in softwood lumber. I mean, the Americans are increasingly difficult to deal with. And so I guess the question to you, Mr. Taylor, is, why should we keep up our end? Well, no, pardon me. Let me go back. Is Alaska keeping up its end of the Pacific Salmon Treaty? Are they abiding by the terms and conditions of that treaty?
The short answer is yes. They are abiding by the treaty. They operate precisely by the treaty. In fact, by their accounting, they're actually, we owe them more catch rather than less.
Is it fair to say then that we negotiated a pretty bad treaty back in the day?
Well, relative to now that climate change it's wreaked its havoc, the treaty was never supposed to be about conservation. It was supposed to be about trading, balancing each other's harvest. And we don't harvest any Alaskan fish to speak up any longer.
So it's going to be balanced. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Right. You got it.
Do you know, Mr. Taylor, I mean, Jim Pattison moved the Canfisco plant from Prince Rupert up to Alaska. Do you know what percentage of the Alaskan catch Canfisco processes?
What percentage of the Alaskan catch Jimmy Pattison processes in Alaska? They are a major player in Southeast Alaska, but they aren't there's several major companies up there, of which they're one. They are a major canner, remaining canner up there.
Okay, that's fine. I don't need to go too far down that particular rabbit hole. Well, so there has been a new agreement, a moratorium on fishing on the Yukon River. How much of that are you aware of, and are there essential elements there that we could take and apply to a new Pacific Salmon Treaty?
I'm disturbed by where the agreements on the Yukon are going, because listening to the First Nations there, they're paying most of the price. It's their subsistence fisheries that are being compromised. In Alaska, if this is where Alaskan stocks, the last thing Alaska would do is compromise their subsistence fisheries. Those are paramount in Alaska.
So are you sure that the Alaskan fishermen are doing to the First Nations up the Yukon River the same as they're doing to fishers in British Columbia, scooping them up at the ocean side?
It's a very similar issue. Their fisheries are intercepting them in the Bering Sea and the pollock fisheries, right down into the big gillnet fisheries that operate outside that area and intercept key populations going to the Yukon. So yes, it's an interception fishery, and it's the same issue.
Okay.
Stocks are declining in the Yukon, and fisheries are not responding appropriately.
So we have a Pacific salmon fishery that, a treaty that has outlived its usefulness. We perhaps have a moratorium on the Yukon River that will be toothless simply because the damage is done before any fish actually get back to the Yukon River. So it would seem then that we've done a pretty decent job of identifying where the problems are. So what do we do about that?
Well, I think there's a few different ideas. I think, Aaron, you had a few ideas you were talking about, and maybe you want to go through them?
Sure. Well, I think one of the you have to look at specifically what the federal government can do. It has to be in Alaska's best interest to reduce these interception fisheries and put in better management practices, like counting fish that they're discarding and requiring live release of the non-target species like we do in BC. But I think we're spending tens of millions of dollars buying out fishing licenses in British Columbia as part of the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative. A lot of those licenses aren't even being fished anymore. So I would argue that it would potentially be as good or better use of public money to offer up the Alaskans a compensation package to move those fisheries out of the interception zones. And there is precedent for that, as I mentioned, with the way that Canada was compensated in 2008 for shutting down our West Coast Vancouver Island troll fishery to reduce impacts on Washington and Oregon state populations. And there are other solutions, but I suspect we're running out of time for my answer here.
Gone a bit over, actually. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. There are similarities between the east and west coasts when it comes to salmon, and I would like to have more details on the species which at different times has to deal with specific issues, and sometimes at some points the salmon are more vulnerable when they move into salt water or come back into fresh water. What are the greatest threats to the Pacific salmon at critical stages in their lives, and how will intervention by the department and scientists help the salmon at those stages? I don't know who is best placed to answer.
That's a very complex question involving an animal that has a life history that spans the far ocean reaches right up into natal rivers 1,000 kilometers upstream from the tidewater. However, one thing that we do know, if you do not get spawning fish onto the spawning grounds, you don't have a chance to recover these populations or conserve them. That is the first thing you got to do, is make sure the fish get back that are necessary to spawn and keep a diverse population, conserve a diverse population. So that's the first step. After that, there is many steps, especially in terms of adapting to, mitigating from climate change impacts that we need to be investing in. Canada, unfortunately, does do a pretty poor job of managing its salmon populations, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And our failure is the reason why Canada's failure to manage its stocks properly is why we lost our marine stewardship certification for our salmon industry in British Columbia.
I'll take your time.
Merci.
Thank you.
I'll go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Oh, actually.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Barron. I jumped over you. That's because you're not in the room making a racket.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will pass my time to my colleague from Skinnabuckley Valley. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. There are lots of different groups that are impacted by this issue in British Columbia. We've heard about the impact on rebuilding salmon stocks. We could talk about the impact on BC's commercial fishery. Of course, there's the sport angling and commercial sport angling aspect of the picture. But I wanted to pick up on what Mr. Hardy was asking about when it comes to Indigenous groups and First Nations. And we had hoped, I believe, to have Indigenous witnesses at the committee. Unfortunately, we weren't able to confirm any attendance. But Mr. Taylor, I understand that you work as a consultant with several First Nations, and I wonder if you could talk about the impact of Alaskan interception on their efforts to rebuild stocks in their territories.
Well, I can tell you a story that I think really captures it. I work with the Lake Babine Nation. 85% of Skeena sockeye return to their territory to spawn. Their wild sockeye stocks in their territory are comprised of a large enhanced component and wild populations, which they've relied on from time immemorial. They are at a point now where they're seriously considering shutting down their enhancement facilities, because all enhancement facilities are doing is driving fisheries in Alaska and in British Columbia, which in turn are depleting their wild populations. This is the kind of serious impact. I mean, we in Canada, First Nations in Canada, are being forced into untenable decisions and considerations by these harvests going on in Alaska. And other First Nations I deal with are also have the same issues in terms of the interceptions of their wild populations coming back are not even reaching Canada. And when they do, their fisheries are being compromised. Their subsistence fisheries are being compromised. So yes, First Nations in Canada, whether they be on the coast that rely on commercial fisheries that are no longer really, I mean, they're a shadow of what they were in the past, or if they're food fisheries in the main stem, or like I say, that people in the spawning channels, not spawning channels, but in the spawning territories are seeing such depletion that they don't even want enhancement, because enhancement just begets more harvest, which begets more depletion of their wild populations. These are the kind of very difficult decisions First Nations are facing.
Thank you. We're a little bit over time. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for the testimony. Mr. Taylor, on Monday, Chief Frost was here, and she said that DFO has not had any enforcement on the Yukon River that she is aware of in the past number of years, in fact, have requested enforcement from CNP on the river. What is your experience, and what would the impact of no enforcement on the river be?
Well, this is going a little bit further afield, but we see it on the Fraser River where there's high levels of IUU fisheries, illegal, unreported, and forget the other one, other term, where there's illegal fisheries going on that are impacting stocks, the endangered Canadian stocks, and there is literally no enforcement. There's other issues in the North Coast where we see lack of monitoring on commercial fisheries. Canada is not putting in place its own policies in regards to monitoring and management and enforcement of fisheries, and it's unfortunate. All of which needs, I mean, Canada just needs to institute its own policy. Just implement your policy, Canada, and we'd be in a good shape. Just DFO refuses to do it. That's simple as that.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And the witness testimony is great, but I did give notice at the end of, and I apologize for this, witnesses, at the end of the last meeting that I would move, and I am doing it so today, move to continue the discussion on my motion of April 18th on Elvers. And perhaps if we can have a quick discussion on and vote on MP Kellaway's amendment in the main motion, we can do this without disrupting the witnesses too much. So I put forward that motion that we resume that debate.
Want to agree? So I'll ask the clerk to record the vote. Well, we'll see if this goes ahead or not, right?
Everybody's agreed.
The witnesses go?
No. He is. Okay.
So no.
Monsieur Cormier?
Just to make sure, on resuming debate, or?
Oui.
Okay, no. No.
Mr. Hanley?
I'm sorry, but no.
Mr. Hardy? No. Mr. Kellaway?
No.
Mr. Morrissey? Mr. Arnold? Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Madame Desbiens?
Je veux juste être certaine que je vote pour la bonne affaire.
I just want to be sure that I'm voting for the right thing. Are we voting to resume debate or on the amendments by Mr. Kellaway? We're voting to resume debate.
Ah, mais on peut en débattre, oui, c'est ça qu'on...
So we can debate it. Why not? Yes.
Ms. Barron?
Yes, we need to get it done. Thank you.
6-5.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay. So debate is Mr. Kellaway. Your amendment?
My amendment, yeah. I move the following amendment. Well, would you not want me to make sure a call? It's not anyone else's call here. You want me to read the moment for the motion in? Okay. So that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government provide a comprehensive report to the committee's comprehensive response to the committee's report.
That's not the amendment you made.
Oh, sorry. That's the one I'm going to make. Jumped the gun a bit. Do you have the? Yeah.
Here, Rick will give it to you. Or,
no, thank you. No, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, can we just suspend for a couple of seconds, please? Just maybe 1 minute. Thank you.
Suspend it. Don't be long.
Thank you.
The amendment of Mr. Calwy, right?
Okay. Clerk,
He wants to read.
you want us to read out?
I don't think so. I think we're good to
Everybody
go.
got a
If
copy?
you know.
Okay.
Okay, go to the vote.
Monsieur Cormier,
Ben oui.
Mr. Hanley,
Yes.
Mr. Hardy,
Yes.
Mr. Kellaway,
Yes.
Mr. Morrissey,
Yes.
Mr. Arnold,
No.
Mr. McLean,
No.
Mr. Perkins,
No.
Mr. Moore,
No.
Madame Desbiens.
Kellaway relit son amendement, puis c'est là-dessus qu'on votait?
Could that amendment be reread, please? Declined to do that. The mover declined to do that.
Yes, sir.
Il va falloir que je fouille dans mes papiers pour la relire.
Right, so I'll have to go through my papers to read it again.
Ms. Barron, are you voting?
Yes, sorry, I was waiting for my name to be called. I'm going to vote against the amendment.
Oh, no.
Et?
Right. Yeah. When you're ready. Oui or no?
S'abstenir, c'est voter, que tu m'as dit.
Abstaining is voting, isn't it? That's what you said, Paul?
J'essaie de voir si mon...
I'm trying to see whether my amendment would work.
We should all lobby Carolise.
Do you need a moment?
You can't do your motion until this one is gone.
Yeah. Do you need a moment, Madame Desbiens?
Ben, non, mais là, si je m'abstiens, c'est pire.
Okay. While Madame Desbiens gets up to speed. Everybody stay in the room. No. Okay.
Ms. Barron?
Ms. Barron already did it. She already did it.
She will?
Yeah.
No.
What?
Sorry, point of order. Can I just clarify? I didn't hear Madame Desbiens' vote, and also my vote is no.
She said no.
Against.
She voted no.
Thank you.
All right.
The microphone was on. Thank you.
All right. That's no to the amendment. Now we'll vote on the main motion as presented. What?
There's three people that want to make amendments, try amendments.
Oh, okay. Ms. Barron.
I know, Ms. Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to put forward an amendment. It has been sent to the clerk, and I'm going to ask the clerk if she can distribute it, but I also know my team member has the amendment in paper copy that he will be circulating. I will go ahead and read that now, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
If you're saying something, I can't hear you. Thank you. So the changes made. So that regarding Minister Diane LaBouthillier decision to close the legal Alva harvest to 2024, the committee finds that. And so the amendments that are made here specifically are in section B, starting with since the closure of the Alva fishery, criminal activity and violence has not decreased as evidenced by witnesses. In section C, adding according to the witnesses prior to the remainder of the point. And in the final paragraph, this will make more sense once people have the version in front of them. I'm amending to add after Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard to do the work required across jurisdictions to make sure that public safety is maintained, First Nations moderate livelihoods rights are protected, and a plan is developed for the long-term sustainability of the Alva fishery. Now, I do notice there's a couple of small grammatical pieces in there. Apologies. I'm happy for those to be corrected. I noticed the is in there twice, but otherwise, those are the amendments that I'd like to put forward.
Okay. Everybody has a copy of the amendment as presented by Ms. Barron? Yeah.
Two things, Mr. Chair. First, I'm not sure if we want to keep the witnesses online. I'm not sure until what time we add, and we're going to ask for a little recess just to go through the...
Everybody in favor of letting the witnesses go? No? Okay. Okay. Had to be unanimous. Mr. Backrack.
On that point of whether to excuse the witnesses, there we go. On the point of whether to excuse the witnesses, I'm trying to get a sense of whether this motion in front of us is a half hour of debate or not, and I think some people around the table might have a pretty good sense of that.
We probably won't know that till we see how many people want to speak to us.
Okay.
And if they're long-winded. Okay. Any discussion on the motion or the amendment? Anybody making an amendment? Okay. Yeah, you're suspended for a moment, yes. Oh. too.
Does anybody want to speak?
Well, does anybody want to speak to the amendment? Or Madame Desbiens?
J'ai une proposition.
I have a sub-amendment to the amendment. At E, in the case of a potential reopening of the fishery, there should be a crisis cell composed of people from the Public Safety Agency, scientific representatives, representatives of the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, etc., to make sure that the fishery can be fair and equitable for everyone.
Okay, everybody heard the amendment. Has everybody seen a copy of the amendment? Why? Everybody understand or have a copy of the amendment? Okay, we'll suspend a moment. We'll get some copies done. I thought you did. Clerk needs to know. I don't care one way or the other.
Donc,
Are you amending
je
the amendment?
C'est ce que j'ai dit. Je passe
There'd
mon
be a
tour,
supplement.
puis j'amende après, ou bien Écoutez, je vais amender l'amendement.
I will amend the amendment. It's 5:10.
Amender
The amendment
l'amendement.
first, and then the sub-amendment.
I think she's trying to amend the main motion, not the sub-amendment, the amendment.
The amendment. What's she said?
I know she can't, because we're dealing with the amendment, she can't, anyway. I'll leave it to the clerk.
Okay, so we vote on the amendment first, and then the sub-amendment.
The sub-amendment and then the amendment?
And then, no.
Lisa
the-
Marie's, and then...
Because the sub-amendment, the original sub-amendment hasn't been passed yet. So that got to be
Amendment.
passed in order
The
for
amendment.
a sub-amendment to take
Oh,
place.
the amendment.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay?
Lisa Marie's
The committee,
and
the committee has to
Carolyn.
vote on the red parts of the.
It seems backwards.
The amendment, right?
Yes. This is the Madam Barron's amendment.
Yes.
You heard that one before? You reading that into the record, Cliff?
Voting on is the amendment, which if you look at the motion as it was distributed, it's what's in red.
The red.
The red color. Yes, yeah, yeah.
Sorry, major question. Is Madame Debienne's motion, is it amending Ms. Barron's motion?
Yes, what she said.
Well, then
Yeah.
we have to vote on that first.
No, we don't.
Yes. Yes, we do.
We get to vote on the sub-amendment first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do a sub-amendment.
That's not what happened first. All right, I'll ask clerk to do the vote on the sub-amendment as presented by Madame Debienne.
Inaudible.
They can't vote.
Ms. Barron.
Ms. Barron.
Sorry, just clarification. Do we have Madame Debier's sub-amendment? Was it circulated?
I'm doing it right now.
She's doing it. The clerk is
Okay,
sending
thank
it out
you.
right now.
Thank you. I just didn't fully comprehend what it was that she's asking for, so I just need to see it.
What? Can't get home night. Can't get home night. Yeah, did one. Not bad, but I did a COVID test last night and today. All clear. It's been sent.
But it's in
What?
French only.
It's in French only. Can we ask Madame Debienne to read out the amendment so as that the translators can interpret it for everybody who
Bien
doesn't speak
sûr.
French?
Je vais aller lentement.
I'll take it slowly.
Quand vous voudrez.
This is a sub-amendment to Ms. Barron's amendment by adding this, that as a part of possibly reopening the fishery, there should initially be put in place a crisis cell made up.
Chair, point order, we can't hear the translation. At least I can't.
This is the English channel. This is the English channel.
Thank you.
OK.
Yeah.
Alors,
Okay, try it again, Madame
je
Debienne, see if
reprends,
Ms. Barron will
merci.
hear it. Oh, I'm getting the translation in my earpiece.
Alors que dans le cadre
That as part of reopening the fishery, first, a crisis cell should be put in place made up of components including the CBSA, Coast Guard, Public Safety Agency, Science Representation, and Legal Fishers to act not only to observe and monitor, but also to protect and to intervene should there be an incident, to foster an adequate, egalitarian, and safer fishery.
Everybody has heard the sub-amendment?
Est-ce que je peux ajouter le paragraphe E? Donc, ça devient le paragraphe E.
This will become subsection E.
We'll call the vote. Madam Clerk?
Monsieur Cormier?
No.
Mr. Hanley?
No.
Mr. Hardy?
No.
Mr. Kellaway?
No. No.
Mr. Morrissey?
No, it's too confusing.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Small?
Aye.
Madame Desbiens? Ms. Barron?
Thank you. I wanted to get clarification if she was saying this is a group that gathers together, because the translation is saying that it is a crisis cell. I don't know what a crisis cell is. So the translation, I think, is if we're talking about a group of people to come together, sure. I can agree with that.
Madame Desbiens should talk to that.
Madam Desbiens, could you answer that for Ms. Barron, please? Ms. Barron, could you ask her again? She didn't have her earpiece.
I'm just asking for clarification as to whether this is a group that's going to be formed with professionals who are impacted or people who are impacted by the Elver fishery to be able to provide informed local perspective. Is that the intention of E?
C'est la description.
It's the description, or that's the way I described it. What has emerged from our observation is this. If the fishery was reopened, history teaches us that we'll end up with the same problems. So what we should do is first to put in place a crisis team made up of everybody who would be involved. And that team would properly monitor the fishery, secure the area, and be there to intervene if necessary. So depending on circumstances, there could be border officers, there could be people from the RCMP, legal fishers, people from the environment, but it would be a crisis team that could support the reopening. Otherwise, reopening that fishery would achieve nothing. It needs a team to secure it. That's my belief.
Mr. Backrack.
Que je sous-amende, pardon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We're in the middle of a vote. What are we doing?
Put up her hand. Or Mr. Backrack put up his hand. He may have a question to the amendment. No one has?
You folks operate a bit differently here at Fisheries than the other committees I sit on. But just based on the discussion so far, I was going to ask Mr. Chair that you excuse the witnesses. It seems like this is going to take the remainder of the time.
I think that's a good suggestion, Mr. Backrack. Everybody in agreement? Because we got those guys online steering into space. So I'll thank the witnesses for their participation here today and sharing their knowledge with the committee as they look to do this study. But unfortunately, we're not going to get back to any more questions because we're right in the throes of a sub-amendment, amendment, and a motion. So that's going to take a little while to get done. So anything you want to get to the committee, please put it in writing, send it to the clerk, and she'll make sure that we're all copied on any information you send. So again,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, they're signed off. Now, sub-amendment.
Ms. Barron?
Ms. Barron.
Ms. Barron?
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Right, so the sub-amendment is approved. And now the amendment as amended. Yes, the amendment as the...
Yes. Like a jelly roll. Oh, I thought you were talking about chicken. No, stop it. Let's just let the fucking...
Call the vote on the motion as amended by Ms. Barron, because the sub-amendment didn't pass, right? It did? Oh, it did, okay. As sub-amendment and amended. The amendment as amended with the motion. First, we got to vote on the sub-amendment.
No, we vote now on the amendment. Then if the amendment is passed, then we vote on the motion.
Yes, yes. Okay.
Madam
Clerk.
Monsieur Cormier?
No.
Mr. Hanley?
No.
Mr. Hardy?
No.
Mr. Kellaway?
Nope.
Mr. Morrissey?
Nope.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
God, yes.
Mr. Small?
Yes.
Madame Desbiens? Miss Barron?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, did Ms. Barron vote?
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, so the amendment is accepted.
The motion is amended.
Yeah, the motion is amended. Now we'll vote on the motion as amended.
Correct.
Mr. Kellaway.
Now I'm going to make a motion to amend, if I can, that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government provide a comprehensive response to the committee's report. And we have the copies here. Okay, then we can then. Okay, just hold on. It's all good. It's all breathe. So what? Yeah. So this is. It's not a report then. It's a little. It's the letter. Yeah. So then fine. I withdraw. Yep.
Okay. Now, back to the motion as amended. Okay.
Monsieur Cormier?
No.
Mr. Hanley?
No.
Mr. Hardy?
No.
Mr. Kellaway?
No.
Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Small?
Yes.
Madame Desbiens? Miss Barron?
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
All right. So the motion is adopted as amended.
Yeah.
All right. What?
In camera for the draft instructions?
Yeah,
You have
we'll,
10 minutes.
yeah, we'll go in camera to do drafting instructions on the Elver letter, I think?
No, that's it.
That's it.
Just the Yukon.
Okay, just the Yukon. Okay, drafting instructions for the Yukon study. We'll suspend for a moment.
Thank you.